Hey guys, welcome to When Spirit Talks, a podcast that explores the realm of spirituality. This week, we welcome the incredibly gifted Whitley Rose, who is a personal dear friend of mine and an amazing therapist. In this week's episode, we're talking about transpersonal therapy, how birth charts can help pinpoint places of trauma, moving through grief, spirit animals, and how you can connect to your departed loved ones by creating an altar. Whitley is so knowledgeable about so many different things, so we're actually going to have her back on as a repeated guest so we can talk about spirit animals, dreams, and the paranormal. I pulled a card of the episode during our spirit segment at the very end, and I shared how that card related to Whitley and the message it had for everyone else who is listening. Whitley is a licensed therapist that specializes in transpersonal therapy. Transpersonal means transcending beyond the person. This style of therapy uses different modalities to work beyond the ego self. It consists of working with 3 layers, the mind, body, and soul. She incorporates using your Akashic records, exploring trauma through astrology, or somatic therapy practices. She's certified in EMDR, hypnosis, psychedelic integration, Reiki, and yoga. I know you guys are going to love this episode, so let's get started. Hey Whitley, welcome to When Spirit Talks.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored to be here and I'm just so excited.
I am so excited to have you on too. And we've been friends for a while now, and we never actually met in person, but we've been through a lot together. And I just love everything about you. And I'm so happy that we connected. So I'm super excited to have you on today. And I know we've already chatted about having you on for other episodes in regards to paranormal and dreams, but today it's all about you. So, I want to know a little bit about your journey and how you started your path to become a transpersonal therapist.
Yes, so I had my first spiritual awakening back in around 2011, and I had just been through a breakup. I had really been like going through a dark night of the soul. I was hitting rock bottom. I was totally just in the thick of it all. And I was working with a therapist at the time because I was having panic attacks and depression, and I was drinking alcohol all of the time. And she introduced me to love and kindness meditation. That was the first meditation I have ever did. And so from there, she invited me to her yoga class, and then it just went and never stopped. It was like a rabbit hole and an awakening that I never stopped on. Yeah. And so it was really beautiful and profound. And I just remember being in her office and just completely like bawling my eyes out because I had never given myself love before. And in that meditation, that was the first moment I had ever felt self-love. And so it was really a powerful shift in my consciousness and my body and on so many different levels.
Feeling that self love, and so many of us don't have that feeling where we embrace our whole selves, our authentic selves, and we really tend to love other people more than we love ourselves. And a lot of it might be the way we're brought up or the experiences that we go through. But I think it's just as a society, we need to work on loving ourselves more. And it is a long process because there's always little bumps that come up. But I love the fact that you were so vulnerable and that you felt like you were in that hole and you found a way to start climbing out of it and working on yourself and finding that peace, that self love piece that is so important to growing and moving forward and living that amazing life.
Yes, exactly. And Yeah, I wish our society did a little bit better of a job, like, teaching us this when we're younger. And so that experience with her literally inspired me to go to grad school and become a therapist myself and teach people these alternative practices. And it saved my life. I can quite literally say it saved my life. And so that is how I started on this journey, was through her and her inspiration. And I grew so much, and yeah, it was life changing. So that is why I decided to go to school and pursue that too.
Incredible. Now, there's might be some people who don't know what transpersonal therapy is. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that and what a session with you looks like?
Yes. So transpersonal therapy is a style of alternative therapy that works with transcending the self. So it works with going beyond the mind and incorporating different layers of like the mind, body, and soul. And each session is so different. There's so many different layers to our experience. And so depending on each client, we can kind of bring in these different uh, these different modalities. And so that could look like somatic therapy. That could look like hypnosis if we're wanting to like work with the subconscious mind. That could also work with astrology if we're wanting to tune into traumas or soul level kind of experiences. And it's such a beautiful practice because it takes us beyond self. And I think that in terms of healing, we really have to lean into, yeah, all of those pieces. Like the body stores our emotions, and the mind stores the memories. And then we have the soul's experience, which stores our experiences for many lifetimes.
Yeah, I always say it's the triangle of health, like the mind, body, and spirit or soul. I feel like they're all connected. And if we leave out the soul or the spirit part, I feel like, yes, that mind body connection is so important. But I feel like adding that spirit and soul part just adds huge levels to that healing.
Yes, exactly. And like talk therapy or like using the mind is super beneficial. Like we have to understand it in our minds and our egos and in this reality. And so it definitely serves a purpose. Most of the time clients will come to me when they're like, okay, I've like talked this till I'm like blue in the face and I don't know what to do with it anymore. Like I'm okay with the memory now, but like, what do I do when I still think of it? My body and my heart rate starts to go up and I know I'm fine, but I don't know how to move it through or go to the next level. And that's really where this style of therapy comes in.
I think that's really helpful because, and I've mentioned this before, but when I tried like the traditional talk therapy, it was one of those things where I just kind of got stuck in the memories of it and just replaying it. And so until I started also diving into that body, soul, spirit connection and releasing it in non-traditional ways through Reiki and energy work, it was like that was the piece of the puzzle that was missing that finally got me to heal in the way that I needed to heal. So, is there anything people can do at home to start integrating the mind, body, and soul to kind of spark that healing piece?
Yes. So some of my favorite tools to lean into the connection of all of these is going to be with something like yoga or meditation. And these are simple practices we can do to get into our bodies or get out of our minds. So meditation is such a great tool to anchor us into the present moment. And yoga is such a good tool to get us into our bodies. Dancing, any type of like body movement is a great way. But I will say I lean more towards the woo-woo side of these, where I definitely encourage tarot cards or checking the astrology chart for the day. Those are personally the practices I use daily for my own mental health. Is I will pull a tarot card, oftentimes many, because I'm not happy with the first answer. I'll keep pulling the oracle cards. I'll do I'll check the astrology. I'll see where my planets are in my different houses and see what kind of themes that might be coming through in that way.
So I have to say this. It was so funny because I don't know if I told you this, but I am pulling a tarot card for every guest that comes on and for each episode. And I pulled yours this morning. And as soon as I pulled it, I was like, I am keeping it because I don't reshuffle. Once it's out, it's out, but it was perfect. And I'm going to talk about that later on at the very end of the episode, but I can't wait for you to see it because there's a past connection with a recent thing that we've spoken about. But anyway.
Yes, I'm so excited.
So, you mentioned astrology. How do you use astrology and birth charts to look at those places of trauma that you talked about earlier?
Yes, so I'll just kind of give a brief description of like what a birth chart is. So essentially it is a blueprint of the sky at the exact time and location that you were born. And so each person's is different, and each person is different because of the time, because of the location, and where the constellations and planets are. And so I will pull up a client's birth chart with them and we will look at so many different things. But I would say if we're trying to do trauma work, we'll look at specific planets together. So an example of what that might look like is, okay, let's find your Chiron, which is an asteroid. Let's see where in your chart your Chiron is, and we will go from there. So Chiron is the asteroid of the wounded healer. And so often our biggest wound in this lifetime is wherever that Chiron placement is. And so, for example, I was just doing this with a client yesterday, and her Chiron was Scorpio. And so we worked a lot around, okay, what does that mean for you? So Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. It's the planet of death and transformation, and it's an intense sign. I'm sure if you've ever heard or met Scorpios, they can be intense in the best ways. Yeah, you're like me.
That's me.
But they can be intense in all of, the best ways as well. And so hers was Scorpio, but a lot of Scorpios are here to actually do a lot of that harder transmutation of energy because they can hold people in the dark and they couldn't hold people in the light. So they're medicine workers that work with both realms of that. And so it's really useful to tune in because it's like, one, this person probably had a pretty traumatic childhood or a big wound that happened in childhood that propelled her into moving through her own darkness. And that's part of her medicine in this life. And that's how she'll heal other people, is through her story. And so that's just one example, but there are so many other planets you can look at and see. So there's like the sun and the moon. Those often work with our mother and father figures, and you can pull those up and see what your attachment might be like with that parent, how they show up, where they show up in your life. And so the possibilities are completely endless in terms of looking at it, but it's so beautiful. And every time I've done this with a client, they have really just felt so understood, and they were able to really see their past in a way that they were able to hold it in this present moment and use it as a way to empower them to be their highest self. And it almost gives them permission, to let that go and to step into their biggest version.
That's fascinating, like literally fascinating. And I'm sure it uncovers so much. And it probably, like, again, I'm talking about puzzles again, but it probably puts all these little pieces together, like things that maybe they potentially weren't aware of, or situations are now clearer. And the fact that you use that to help them move forward and bring them that like clarity and understanding is amazing.
Yes, it's pretty powerful stuff. I would definitely recommend, if you haven't looked at your chart, to do it just for your own understanding of self. So a birth chart has 12 different houses in it, which represent 12 different aspects of our life. And so that's 12 different areas where you could dive deep into your own inner knowing. And it is a beautiful, beautiful tool if you're wanting to do any type of deep healing or transmutation of self.
So I remember when I found mine out, but I don't know all the tiny planets and the asteroids that you're mentioning. I just know my sun sign, which is Scorpio, my moon sign, which is Libra, and my ascending, which is Leo. So those I know, but I don't know any of the other tiny ones.
I love that for you. I see the Leo so much for your rising. And I think I'm a Leo rising. Well, I didn't know if you said that.
I was going to say, what are yours?
Yeah. So, yes, I am Aquarius sun. I am a Taurus moon and a Leo rising.
That is awesome. So if anyone wants to look at their birth chart, contact Whitley. She will give you those ins and outs.
Yes.
I know you also incorporate a lot of animal energies within your spiritual practice. So is there a tip that you can give listeners to deepen their own connection to these energies? And can you share more about what you do with these energies?
Yes. So animals are probably one of my favorite realms to work with. And I know we talk about this all the time. We're sending
Mhm.
animal pictures and symbols like on the reg. And so it's such a powerful realm to tune into and call on and support. And so a recent example of a way in a therapeutic realm, we used spirit guides. So I have a spirit guide. It's a tiger, and he is my thought tracker guide. So when I was experiencing a lot of anxiety, OCD kind of thoughts, overthinking, back in that dark night of the soul, I called upon him and he became my thought guide. So what he does is he paces my brain all the time. He's circling and pacing and protecting and watching. And so if he notices that there's a thought that won't go away or it's really loud, he will actually start roaring this loud, loud roar that drains out that thought in my mind to where all I can hear is a roaring instead of the thought that I want to let go of. And so he helps me come back to self in that way. And so it is such a powerful practice that I share with clients all of the time, just for that example. Like, get yourself a thought tracker, somebody that is there and can help you if you're overthinking. And it changed my life in that way. It was such a powerful tool, but that's just one way I use them in terms of mental health. I use animal guides pretty much every single day for other aspects as well, just for asking them for signs or protection. I have a guide that I work with that opens my channels. That's an animal. So if I'm channeling or doing any type of psychic work, that's my guide that opens and closes that. And so I think I probably have the most guides that are animals now that I'm thinking about it.
I never heard of the thought tracker, but that's a really cool concept. And how did you go about meeting that guide as that thought tracker?
Yeah, so I sat in meditation, and there's so many meditations to find a spirit guide. You probably even have one somewhere, I'm sure. But you can YouTube it or get on like Insight Timer or something and just look it up if you would like a guided one. But that is how I journeyed in. I listened to a guided meditation that had me call on an animal and notice what animal I was seeing. And that was it. And so I will say that if you want the most powerful experience in terms of spirit guide meditations, go into it with an intention of what you want this guide to do for you or how to help you or how to support you. And I think that that will give you just an even more deeper and profound experience.
Intention just really like highlights what you want to get out of it. And I think it makes the message a bit clearer and stronger, especially if you're just starting out. I did notice for me, The animals pop up when I'm in a different phase of my life. So when I started learning about craniosacral therapy and I took some classes, I remember a black panther showed up. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. I didn't know what it was at the time, but you'll start to notice when things pop up, put a mental like post it on that moment, because it wasn't until I started the class when the host took out this big drum and on it was a black panther. I was like, oh my gosh, this is how it's like coming together. But I love that, just like you said, you can set that intention to meet whatever guide you want to meet for whatever purpose.
Yes, of course. And that's a great example too, that our guides are always around us and you don't even have to drop into meditation to work with them. Just notice what's around, what animals are showing up in your life, what's going on in your life when they show up, and you can start to build a relationship, with them. I just had that experience with a bee. It's like a bumblebee that I kept seeing and seeing. And now every time I go on a walk, there's at least one bumblebee that will come and follow me my whole journey. And so it took me, I think, probably a couple of days to notice that this was a repeating pattern and a spirit guide screaming for my attention, but they're there. And so, yeah, stay curious about that and see if you can start to build a relationship with them. And the easiest way that I started doing that was just watching it, observing it, and seeing how I was feeling when I was doing that, and seeing what I was thinking when I was observing the bee as well.
I know for me, just this week, and we've talked about this too, but I had the wasp show up in my house, a few of them, and finally it was like the big queen one. And then the bat was living behind my shutter. And it was so funny because it happened a few years ago where I was sitting at home. It was a full moon, just like today, actually. Today's a full moon too.
Yeah.
So I was sitting at home. We were watching Twilight Zone. Full moon was out, and I saw something flying in the house. So again, I'm so scared of anything that flies, not when it's far away, but as it gets close to me, I'm like, no, I panic. But so my husband was like, oh, it's fine. It's probably just like a stink bug or something, because I would freak out regardless. And I remember I looked up again and I saw it flying in the house. I screamed. I was like, oh my gosh, it's a bat. So we had a bat in the house. So I ran into my room, I locked my door, and luckily he ended up being able to get it out of the house. I walked in the living room and there were like vitamin bottles everywhere. Like literally the house was a disaster because he was trying to get this thing out of the house. But the next morning, I used my animal oracle deck and I pulled the bat card. And in that moment, it was like there was a lot of change and transformation going on. And so the bat showed up again recently this year. So I'm like, things are shifting. So start to notice these patterns, because they might show up for you now, and this animal spirit might show up, but then it might show up again a few years down the line to kind of remind you, because you might be going through that cycle of growth again.
Yes, exactly. I love that.
And Whitley, you have so much experience helping people who are working through trauma, grief, and loss. And what is one practical tip that you have for people who might be working through that themselves? And how do you help them work through it?
Yeah, that's such a big one. And it's definitely could be an episode itself. I feel like
Yes.
grief is so important to talk about. And I feel like in our society, it often gets a bad rep there. But I would say the one thing that helped me and that I encourage clients to do with grief is like lean into it and allow it to be there, allow it to show up in whatever way it does. And I often like to use the example of like when my sister passed away and my partner and I were at dinner and I just like started bawling my eyes out at this like fancy dinner. And I tried so hard to like hold it in, like keep it together. And my partner just said, like, you have permission to be in that right now. Like, it's okay. And I just lost it. And it was just so funny because afterwards we were joking and we were like, they probably thought like, I broke up with you and you were just totally distraught and like, and so, but lean into it, like allow it to come wherever it is, because the more we resist our pain, the more it is suffering. Suffering is resistance. It is that resistance of our experience, that resistance of like the reality of the way things are right now. And so by leaning into it, allowing it to be here, you will move it and it will come, grief comes in waves, it will come back, but you're not stuck in it. And that's like, I think the most important thing in working with grief is just allow it to be there, lean into it, let it be sad for that moment and know that, it will pass. And grief doesn't get easier over time. It just, we're able to tune more into the love of that. And there was a quote I wanted to share that I shared with a client recently. Grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all about the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers in the corner of your eyes, in the lump in your throat, in the hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go.
Oh, wow. That is so beautiful.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps every time. And it's such a beautiful quote because it is really grief, and the pain with grief is just love. And so when you're working with grief, it's just coming back to that every time, coming back to the love within yourself, with, this person, this thing. It's tuning into those, and a great way to honor someone with love, like if you have lost someone special to you in your life, is with an altar. I don't know if you can see behind me, but I have a picture of my sister on my altar there. And so every time I place objects from outside or light a candle or pull any cards, it's right next to her in that energy. And so it's a way to honor her too. I always will keep elemental items there, just honoring her earth side energy. And it's a great way too to channel their spirits, because they kind of have a great vessel they can come to and know that you'll show up there and talk to them, pray for them, lean into their energy.
That's a wonderful idea. It's beautiful. It's just like a private, sacred place where you can connect with those you love, even if they're not here in the physical.
Yes, exactly.
So, Whitley, I want to now start diving into our spirit segment. So, what is one thing that you always include in your daily routine that helps you stay spiritually grounded and balanced that might help others do the same?
Tarot cards are definitely my go-to.
Mm,
Yes, I have used this practice for over a decade. And at this point, I have different decks that work with different spirits. I have different cards in the tarot that work with different spirits. And so my favorite way to just connect is to pull a card and just see what comes up, what I feel looking at the card, what I notice in my thoughts when I'm looking at the card, what I'm feeling in my body when I'm looking at the card, because all of those are connections and all of those are messages from, spirit, the divine source.
that's one of my favorite things to do too. So I am with you 100%. And again, we're going to have you on another time because you are so multifaceted and you know about so many different things. So we're going to talk about paranormal another time. But can you tell us one of your favorite stories regarding your connection with spirit?
Yes, I have so many paranormal stories, and I know me and you talk about those, but I'll save them for the paranormal episode. And when I read this question, I knew right away which one that I had to share. And so it comes back to my sister. I actually wasn't even going to bring her up, but here she is chatting through me as we're here. So there's obviously something that needs to be shared with that. And so my story that is coming back full circle to my sister and the message that she wants to share today. And so at this point in time, I was living in Colorado and working at a psychiatric hospital, and I was working the night shift. And so this was in the winter time. So the nights would often get really foggy, eerie, and misty. And so I'm starting to drive to work, and it's the middle of the night. And so I'm feeling a little emotional, as I'm driving. It's dark outside, I'm alone. And I started thinking of my sister, and I started crying. I started bawling like while I was driving. And I can remember I was like crying so hard. I was almost like, should I even go to work? Like, I'm so distraught right now. Like, this is so intense. I was really missing her. It was just something about that darkness that really brought through all of those emotions. And so as I'm sitting here crying, I see this thing come out of this white fog mist, and it is this massive, massive deer with big antlers. And I grew up in West Virginia, and so I'm familiar with deer, and this was like the biggest one I've ever seen. It was almost like 8 points antlers, like massive, massive antlers. And I slammed on my brakes and it stopped right in front of my car. And here I am still bawling, thinking of my sister, and this mystical, magical buck is just right in front of me. We're staring at each other for at least 30 seconds, and then he moves on. And I get goosebumps every time I share this and think about it, because I know for a fact that that was my sister's energy. It was almost out of this world kind of experience, and to happen at the exact moment where I was calling to her, I was sobbing, I was wanting to connect to her. So that's probably one of my favorite spirit encounters.
Wow. I got goosebumps as you were talking as well. And it's a beautiful story because it was like in that point of grief where your soul was calling out to hers, and she was able to come to you and give you that sense of comfort and that connection. So that is incredible.
Yes, it was so beautiful. And now every time I see deer, I know that she is here, and we chat, and I take time and I observe them, and they're a huge spirit animal for me in that way.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And what is one final piece of advice that you have for listeners who are trying to improve their spiritual well-being?
I think the best advice in the spirit realm that has helped me was trusting yourself and knowing that you're not making it up. I can remember my first shamanic journey, um, and during my first spiritual awakening, and I just was like, you are making this up, like this is all in your head. There's nothing like beyond that. And I would say to question that, because we are conditioned as humans in this realm um to not believe in anything, beyond this existence. And so allow yourself play, and play, creativity, imagination, like allow all of that to come through, and just know that, you're not making it up, and trust the signs you're seeing, trust the thoughts you're hearing. And even if you feel like you're making it up, if it makes you feel better, then who cares?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like live in that divine feminine, because when you're diving into intuitive side of you and that creative side to you, it really does help all of that intuitive stuff like bloom. And I feel like a lot more people need to start tapping into that, because I think a lot of times that's when people see the most growth in connecting spiritually or channeling or connecting to spirit. So that was a great, great tip that you just gave. And even
Yes.
the releasing that self doubt and the trust, because it's so true. When you're working with energy and you're connecting to spirit, there's no, I mean, sometimes they will give you like an external nugget of confirmation, but a lot of times there is no external, like flat out feedback that you're like, oh, I'm 100% correct. So it's all about, like you said, trusting yourself and, just leaning into it.
Yes, exactly. I love that.
Where can our listeners learn more about you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Whitley Rose on Instagram, or whichleyrose.com is my website. And I would be so honored to connect to any of you, with any of you in any capacity. I do work as a therapist, but I lean a lot in the woo-woo. So if you're looking for either, please connect. I love to have these conversations. I know me and you are constantly having the most profound conversations in our Instagram DMs. So if anyone is looking for support or just someone to share like your story with, I love hearing your experiences in the spirit world. And so I would love to connect.
You, like I always say, you're the best of both worlds.
Mhm.
Okay, so I am ready to show you the card. Are you ready?
Yes.
You got the 10
Oh
of
my gosh.
swords. So Whitley got the 10 of swords. And so every deck is different when it comes to tarot. I'm using the Way Home Tarot deck. And so it's this bird with that's dead, and it has all of these swords and little metal pieces in its belly. But it was interesting because when it popped up, again, you see the literal image, but then when you're reading tarot, you use that intuition and like the feelings, just like you blend it all together. And as soon as I saw this, there were a few things that came to mind. One was this popped up for us when we were chatting. Was it last week?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had pulled this card because I pull a daily card too. And I remember I pulled it in the morning and I kind of journaled what I thought it meant for me that day. And I open my Instagram account and I pull up Whitley's DM, and she commented and she left me a message about this fallen bird that was at your doorstep or your window.
Yeah. On my stairs right outside my door.
Yeah, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, that is it. So that was the sign that day. So now it's coming back again, right? Now this is the second time it's coming back. And the second thing that I picked up on was you are so in tune, I feel like, with your shadows, and you are so comfortable in dealing with grief and loss and the darkness. I feel like you are so strong and you just are so in tune with handling darkness and supporting people in times of need. And then the third thing was your relationship and your knowledge about death and the paranormal. So when I saw this card, I was like, it makes so much sense. And again, it's not a card that typically people would pick up and be like, oh my God, I love that card. It's not, but it was perfect for you because I feel like you are the positive of this card. Like typically people look at this card and they get scared, right? They live in that like fear, that little
Mm.
sense of fear. And it was like you are the positive light aspect to
Mhm.
this card. And the other thing was we talked about grief a lot today. And I feel like, so again, I pulled the card right before. So I didn't have all of
Mhm.
the stuff that we were going to talk about. But as I'm like pulling that into it now, it's like we were talking about grief, sitting in it and holding space for it to move past it. And I think it's another reminder, like the fact that you brought up your sister today and that she was here with you twice. And now I'm just realizing twice. We talked about this twice. You talked about your sister twice today.
Yes.
Along with potential hardships that you might have been facing within recent times. It's like that is now over. Like that hardship, that process, like you went through it. You might have felt like you hit rock bottom or it killed you in a sense, like it killed your spirit, but you are now able to move forward and move on to brighter days and shine that beautiful light and help others deal with, those hardships.
Beautiful. My heart, like when you were sharing that, thank you so much for that reflection. And that is so full circle. It really is. And it's so funny because I even wrote out some notes for the questions, and we only had like one question we were going to talk about with grief. And it just was like where the message went on so many questions today. So it definitely was, needed to be shared and talked about. And I think it was a great reminder for me too of, the beauty of death and transformation is it is hard, but it also aligns us to our greatest self, our highest soul's purpose. And so and you can have both. There can be, the light and dark in that. You can be grieving and you can also be happy, the polarity of life. And so, yeah, if you're listening to this and you're experiencing the intense solar flares or the eclipse season that we just through, just know that like you're on the end of it and you're shifting big things, and all of this is going to just propel you into your best version. And it might not be clear now, it may feel heavy. And just trust that, though. Trust yourself that you're handling it, you're doing it. And just trust that it will show up for you when the time is right.
Yeah, I love how you put that because I was going to say a very similar thing. So, for anyone else who's listening, if you find that maybe what you thought you wanted didn't work out the way you wanted, that the struggle and pain will end, and that at some point you will find hope again and you'll rise up and be able to embrace a new challenge and a new cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure. I always love sitting with you and chatting with you. And I'm so grateful to have you as my friend. So, thank you for coming on.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. And I'm also grateful to have you in my life. Truly, you bring so much light and love. And I just love our conversations. They make my week. So I thank you for having me here, and thank you for showing up for me in that way as well.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoy the podcast and love to listen to it, subscribe, follow, or leave a review. You can connect with me on Instagram at live.and.breathe.reiki or on my website at liveandbreathereiki.com. Until next time, don't forget, when spirit talks, it's time to listen.